Imagine a puzzle piece, one of the largest and most intricate in the terrestrial grand design, deciding that the picture it was part of was no longer enough. 88 million years ago, the supercontinent of Gondwana, the bedrock of our ancient world, began to groan and fracture. Under immense pressure, the tectonic plates groaned, and the land tore itself apart. Most of these fragments drifted and danced, eventually colliding with others. They smashed into continents, merging their soil, their biotas, and their destinies. But one massive fragment, the tectonic raft that would become Madagascar, refused to play by the rules of collision. It chose the path of the hermit. It drifted away into the void of the Indian Ocean, becoming a lonely voyager in the middle of a vast, saltwater desert. Think of it as the ultimate do not disturb sign hung on the door of the planet. For 88 million years, that sign has never been taken down. When this island became truly isolated, it stopped participating in the evolutionary arms races of the mainland. While the rest of the world was refining mammals and perfecting predators, Madagascar was doing something else entirely. Evolution here didn't just proceed, it took a detour into the surreal. It took the fundamental blueprints of life, the basic sketches of anatomy and instinct, and with no outside competition or migration to stifle them, began to improvise with radical, feverish creativity. If Earth is a grand, orderly library of life, where species are cataloged and cross-referenced by geography, Madagascar is the secret room hidden behind a bookshelf in the back. It is the forbidden archive where the authors were given free rein to write whatever they wanted, no matter how bizarre, how impossible, or how beautifully strange. Nature here abandoned the familiar. It sculpted creatures that look as though they were imagined in a hallucination, primates that drift through trees like spirits, reptiles with faces like prehistoric carvings, and plants that trap light in colors the rest of the world has forgotten. Today, we aren't just traveling across a map or documenting a wilderness. We are stepping backward through 88 million years of an evolutionary fever dream. We are going to trek through forests that feel plucked from a different planet. Come face to face with the bizarre descendants of ancient stranded castaways and uncover why this island is, in the same breath, both a fragile paradise and a haunting, urgent warning about the cost of being truly alone. To understand the wonder of Madagascar, you have to understand the two-part miracle of its existence. First, the Great Escape, which left the island stranded in the blue void. And second, the Great Roulette, where life found a way to reach a shore that seemed impossibly far away. Life did not exist on Madagascar by grand design. It arrived through a series of improbable, miraculous accidents. Once the island had drifted hundreds of miles from the African coast, it became a biological fortress. Only the most desperate and resilient travelers could reach it. Picture a storm-ravaged coast in ancient Africa. A massive tree, torn from the earth by a hurricane, washes into the sea. Clinging to its tangled, muddy roots are the accidental pioneers. Small primates, reptiles, and rodents caught in a state of suspended animation. Terrified, exhausted, but alive. These natural rafts were caught in the powerful Mozambique Channel currents. Most drifted into the abyss, succumbing to hunger or dehydration. But the few that landed on the shores of Madagascar were entering a world without competition. Because the island had no large carnivores and no existing mammal hierarchy, these castaways didn't have to fight to survive. They had to become. Once these pioneers stepped onto the sand, the lack of external pressure caused an explosion of experimentation. Without the presence of monkeys or apes to compete with, the lemurs, the descendants of those early castaways, didn't just stay lemurs, They diversified into 100 different shapes. In the absence of specialized niches, nature played dress-up with them. The sifaka developed powerful, spring-loaded legs to dance across jagged limestone spires, occupying a space that would normally belong to a monkey. The ai evolved a skeletal, hypersensitive middle finger, designed to tap on bark and fish out grubs, filling the role of a woodpecker, a bird that never quite managed to dominate the island's forests. The fossa, a cat-like predator that isn't a cat at all, but a relative of the mongoose, bulked up and grew razor-sharp, retractable claws to become the island's apex assassin. This wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was survival of the most inventive. Because the island was isolated, it developed biological endemism at a level found nowhere else on Earth. Over 90% of the island's wildlife exists here and only here. If evolution is a game of chess, the rest of the world has been playing a high-stakes, aggressive match for millions of years. Madagascar, however, has been playing a solitary game of solitaire, constantly reshuffling its pieces to see how many different ways they can fit into the board. But this long, solitary experiment is now under siege. The Do Not Disturb sign has been torn down. The very isolation that allowed for this creative explosion has also made these species incredibly vulnerable. They are masters of a specialized stay-stable world, and they have no genetic memory of how to deal with rapid, human-driven change. We are not just looking at a beautiful museum of ancient life. We are watching a masterpiece that is still being painted, even as the canvas begins to fray at the edges. We have established the how, the oceanic rafts and the lack of competition, and the what, the bizarre, wonderful creatures that resulted from these conditions. As we prepare to step further into the deep, overgrown history of this island, where would you like to focus our gaze? On the shadowy, nocturnal creatures that only emerge when the forest grows dark, or on the living fossils, the ancient plants and reptiles that have remained virtually unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs. To truly understand the heartbeat of Madagascar, you must defy the human instinct to look toward the horizon. You must look up. Rising from the earth like monolithic pillars from a forgotten age are the Baobabs, the Reniala, or Mother of the Forest. Local Malagasy legends weave a tale of hubris and divine intervention. They say that when the gods were sculpting the landscapes of the world, they assigned each tree a temperament and a home. They granted the Baobab immense stature and the promise of eternal life. But the Baobab, ancient and insatiable, grew restless. It complained of the heat, demanded deeper soil, and envied the height of the mountain peaks. Exhausted by its endless, booming grievances, the gods finally plucked the tree from the earth and thrust it back in upside down, its roots thrusting toward the heavens to keep it quiet. Looking at their surreal, spindly geometry, you can almost believe it. They are trees that seem to defy the logic of the forest, holding the sky with their fingers rather than anchoring themselves within it. Think of the average tree as a simple daily expense account. The Baobab, however, is a fortress, a vault built to survive the apocalypse. In a landscape where the sun is a relentless hammer and months can pass without a single drop of life-sustaining rain, these giants are the architects of their own survival. They hold up to 32,000 liters of water within their fibrous, pulpy trunks. They are not merely wood and leaf. They are vast, living cisterns. They are literal liquid gold to every insect, bird, and mammal that clings to their shadow for refuge. But there is a profound, aching melancholy to this silent avenue. To look at these trees is to gaze upon the survivors of a genocide of landscape. Millions of years ago, these individuals were not isolated statues on a dusty road. They were the anchors of a dense, interlocking tropical canopy, a lush, biodiverse paradise that carpeted the island in an endless, breathing carpet of green. This was an ecosystem that had thrived for eons, undisturbed by the heavy, destructive footprint of man. Then, roughly 2,000 years ago, the first settlers arrived on the coast. We did not just settle on this land, we dismantled it. Through fire, agriculture, and the slow, grinding machinery of expansion, we erased the forest. The lush, interconnected world that once supported these trees was systematically burned away, leaving the Baobabs stranded in an alien, arid expanse. These survivors are not here because they chose to be. They are here as the solitary remnants of a kingdom that has been wiped from the map. Tradition holds that the first settlers, struck by the sheer imposing presence of these trees, recognized them as sacred. They spared them, allowing them to remain as silent sentinels, witnesses to a vibrant world that our ancestors burned to the ground. Today they stand as the island's memory, watching over a land that is a pale shadow of its former self. They are a living, breathing testament to the thin line between survival and erasure, and the silent cost of human arrival in a land that was perfectly balanced without us. If the Baobabs are the stoic guardians of Madagascar's history, the Tsingy de Bemaraha is the island's jagged, impenetrable keep out sign. To stand here is to stand inside a geological catastrophe. Imagine, if you will, a massive, flat sheet of limestone deposited under a warm, shallow sea millions of years ago. As the tectonic plates shifted and the land was thrust skyward, the stone was exposed to the relentless, erosive chemistry of tropical rain and groundwater. Over eons, the water acted like a slow-moving, acid-tipped chisel, carving the rock into a labyrinth of razor-sharp needles. If you were to lose your footing here, you wouldn't simply fall. You would be dismantled. It is a natural razor wire, a chaotic forest of stone that defies the human instinct to explore. For centuries, the local Malagasy people did not merely avoid the Tsingy. They regarded it with a profound, ancestral reverence. They whispered that these needles were the Knifey ni Tani, the teeth of the earth, or the petrified citadels of spirits who demanded total solitude. It is only in our modern blink-of-an-eye era that we have dared to bridge these gaps with suspension cables. Walking across one of those bridges is an exercise in the total surrender of control. You are suspended 70 meters in the air, swinging over a labyrinth of blades that stretch down into a dark, inaccessible abyss. Your technology fails you here. GPS signals ping frantically off the mineral walls, lost in the maze. Here, the map is meaningless. The only direction that holds any truth is up. It is a humbling, visceral reminder that on this island, humans are not the masters of the landscape. We are merely passing visitors in a realm that was designed by tectonic force and time to be left entirely alone. To understand the lemurs, we must stop viewing evolution as a steady, predictable march. We must view it as a long-shot gamble, a desperate, high-stakes wager where the house almost always wins. Except for this one, singular instance. 60 million years ago, a group of small, nocturnal, tree-dwelling primates found themselves on a pile of storm-tossed vegetation. They had been ripped from the coast of Africa by a hurricane, and they were now drifting into the open maw of the Indian Ocean. It was a 400-kilometer gamble against the indifferent currents. By all laws of probability, they should have vanished into the salt and the spray, but they didn't. When those few terrified pioneers washed ashore, they hit a biological reset button. On the African mainland, primates were locked in a brutal, unending arms race, squeezed by the emergence of smarter, faster, more aggressive monkeys and apes. But in Madagascar, the slate was clean. There was no competition. There were no predators hunting them in the daylight. In that vacuum, the lemurs didn't just survive. They reinvented the concept of the primate. They branched out into over 100 distinct species, filling every available niche. They became the ghosts of the forest, the acrobats of the canopy, and in the case of the long-extinct archaeolemur, they even grew to the size of gorillas, walking the forest floor with a confidence their ancestors could never have imagined. If you want to understand how these creatures mastered this world, you have to stop looking and start listening. Deep in the eastern rainforests, you will hear a sound that defies the typical chatter of the wild. It is not a monkey's screech or a bird's chirp. It is the song of the Indri. The Indri's call is haunting, melodic, and strangely human. It sounds like a cello being played in the resonant silence of a cathedral, a long, mournful note that travels for kilometers through the dense, light-starved canopy. Sound, in a place as thick and cluttered as a Madagascan rainforest, is the primary language of survival. Visibility is limited to mere meters, but sound travels. The Indri song is a declaration of territory, a map of social bonds, and a beacon that anchors a family unit in a world of endless leaves. It is the sound of an ancient gamble finally paying off, a life force that has found its melody in the silence of the Indian Ocean. We have stood upon the teeth of the earth and heard the song of the survivors. We began this journey with a single puzzle piece, drifting into the void. We end with the realization that Madagascar has never been an island. It has been a living laboratory. It is a mirror held up to the face of the planet. It shows us what happens when life is left to its own devices. It becomes strange, it becomes beautiful, and it becomes terrifyingly efficient. But it also serves as a haunting warning. We have seen the "Do Not Disturb" sign torn down. We have seen the fragile, evolutionary outcomes of 88 million years exposed to the relentless speed of human change. These baobabs have stood here for a millennium, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of kingdoms, the shifting of climates, and the fleeting arrival of our species. They have seen the world change again and again. And as we pack our bags and return to our own lives, we must carry this truth. We are not the masters of this kingdom. We are merely visitors, walking through a living archive. And the greatest responsibility we have is to ensure that when we leave, the story does not end.